like the other folks are going to.
They were supposed to be coming.
Supposed to. Give them to. But,
Okay. Whoa. Hello, I'm Sarah Hempel-Irani, council member representing District 5, and I'm also a local artist.
Hi, my name is Heather Goddard. I represent East Frederick Rising, the local nonprofit on the east side of Frederick Community Building.
Hi, I'm Ann Ryan with Frederick Housing Solutions Task Force.
I'm Carol Kelly. I'm a member of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Paul Fitzgerald, an architect, Historic Preservation Commission, and 40-year resident of Frederick County.
Ann Hart, I'm the Vice Chairman of Historic Preservation and a resident here in downtown Frederick.
Ed McMahon, I'm also a member of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Alan Feinberg, I generally just say I'm a citizen.
We're just introducing ourselves.
Hi, I'm Sharon Kemper-Cerez. I'm a consulting planner, and I'm also a resident of the city of Frederick. And I'm here because I am a strong supporter of strong towns.
And Peter Brem, City of Frederick, District 3 council member.
Great. And I know we've got some folks online, so please feel free to introduce yourselves.
If I can step in, my name is Christina Martin-Koski. I'm the Division Manager of Historic Preservation Planning, and I'm so thrilled that there's so many HPC commissioners here tonight, so I want to call out and thank everybody for coming.
Great, thank you. My name is Edward Erfurt, and I am representing Strong Towns. We are a not-for-profit advocacy organization. My background is in architecture and planning. I did a lot of work on the public or private sector, working on master plans and codes and development, and also spent about 20 years on the public sector, working in planning departments. I live just down the street from you all over in Charlestown, West Virginia. So Frederick is one of the places that I come to when I need to do things that we don't have in our community across the river. So this is a place that I'm somewhat familiar with, more than I normally am when I go to different places. At Strong Towns, I always have to kind of start off one of these conversations to just tell you that as an advocacy organization, I am not here to tell Frederick or any of you what to do. We're not consultants. We're not here for an intervention. What I hope with our time together today and then tonight at CivicCon is that I can help you think differently through some of the things that you all are struggling with and experiencing in your built environment. At Strong Towns, we have 5 core campaigns that all are working towards shifting the way that we develop in the United States. That development pattern we see around us, Frederick is being blessed and cursed with that type of development pattern on your edges. I'll go into a lot of that tonight. But this afternoon, I want to take the opportunity of just starting a dialogue, keeping it, answer questions, I'm happy to share ideas, things that you might be struggling with here in the community. I've had the opportunity this morning to meet with some folks, and I got toured around the city. So I've got to see a lot of things and experiencing that. I've got the experience of the design work. I did a lot of crazy things in local government, taking places that were struggling and trying to figure things out. Those are the places I really liked working. So working in those areas and making a lot out of the diamonds in the rough. So that's a real passion I have. The work I'm doing at Strong Towns, I have a funny title. It's called Chief Technical Advisor. It's a bizarre title, but the nutshell of the work I do is that through the work at Strong Towns, we have advocates and local leaders and community members that see a YouTube video, they see a social post, they read an article, read one of the books from Strong Towns, and they get motivated to do something. And when you start doing stuff, you will soon realize you hit roadblocks. I don't know where to start at City Hall. I want to build something. I don't know how to start a new development. There's this code that's a barrier to moving forward. I get the opportunity to work with our members and share what we've seen across North America to help you think through those struggles so that you can tackle it. Today, and I hope tonight, the takeaway that you should leave, anybody that is hearing us at Strong Towns talk, the takeaway that you should all leave with is the knowledge that you have the power to address all of those issues that you are struggling with in your community. Affordability, availability, land development patterns, parking, highway expansion, all of those things, you have the power at the most local level to tackle and address those. So just want to kind of start that off. So if you ask me a question and I prod back, I'm prodding back to help understand where you have the ability at local level to do that work. So I'm here at the podium. It feels a little awkward with everybody in the room, but are there questions or issues that you all are struggling with and talking about in Frederick, or is there something you saw recently at Strong Towns that you're interested in talking about? Yeah.
One large issue is that the city is growing quickly, fastest growing city in the state, fastest growing county in the state. So we're now at 90,000, and the projections are it's going to be a whole lot more people quickly. So one of the issues we're wrestling with is how do we retain our historic small town character from a build-out standpoint while accommodating required additional development.
Yeah. So when we look at the development pattern, there are two types of development patterns that exist in our built environment, and you have both of them here in Frederick. I talked to a lot of places that only have one. The first is the traditional development pattern. These are the places that have grown incrementally over time. So these are the places that started out with small buildings. As those small private bets occurred, the buildings expanded up and out over time. This is a pattern of development that we saw in the United States all the way up until just after World War II. So when we look at the historic core, the historic neighborhoods of Frederick, this is how many of these places were built. These are places that changed incrementally over time. Nothing started out here on this street at one story. They all started at one story, and over time they went up. They all started probably, if we look at the historic plat, they're probably on little 20-foot wide lots, and they've expanded out. There have been various incremental bets that have occurred here. That's the traditional development pattern. That is where the private sector is taking that initial risk, and they're accumulating wealth in those areas. They're also the areas where my grandfather and father-in-law would go and build starter homes. So my grandfather built his home by himself. He went out, took his paycheck every 2 weeks to the lumberyard to get the materials to build his home over the several months to build that up. It was very small and modest, and over the years was able to add additions and expand out, accumulating that wealth. That is that kind of traditional pattern. The other development pattern that we have came after World War II. When we came out of the Great Depression, when we were wrapping up World War II, there was this great need to build lots of housing very quickly. And what we did is a very human thing. Humans love order. So we created these very orderly systems that would allow us to not have all little experiments, that we would do everything all at once in giant leaps. And we shifted from all of those small bets into the prioritizing that expansive growth. That is the suburban development pattern. This is a pattern of development that allows us to build lots and lots of units all at once, scaled across the landscape. When we look at the development patterns we see here in Frederick, they look just like the ones that are down where I'm at in West Virginia. They look like the development pattern in Ohio, in California. It is a system that we've put into place that allows us to do lots of housing all at once. What I will tell you with the traditional development pattern is that is a proven complex pattern. It's a pattern that over time has been tested and challenged. And that pattern, as we see, when we think about all of the struggles a community like Frederick has had in its history, over 250 years of history, it has lasted and survived through all those small bets. The suburban development pattern allows us to do hundreds of acres at a time, lots of units. We've developed codes and regulations that allow us to do that at scale. We've added funding mechanism behind it to allow us to do lots of funding to fund that type of work. It would be described as efficient, but it's also very fragile. Those are the sorts of systems that when they're built to a finished state, these are the ones that if there's a hiccup in the stock market, we see the financial drop in those areas. They're the places that are built to a finished state, so they're not allowed to age over time. So sometimes they're the areas in our communities that are aging as well as the others. All the roofs age at the same rate in a community, so 20 years after they're built, everybody's roof needs to be replaced at the same time. Those are those two patterns. What we find in this environment is those orderly systems that allow us to address the struggles after World War II. We have ingrained those into all of our review processes within our communities. So when we look at our land development patterns, what you will find when you talk to developers, they will find that it's much easier to develop a 10, 20, or 100 acre parcel than a half-acre parcel in the core downtown. But on the edge, because they can distribute the risk, the timelines, the finances, all of that over multiple units over one. But when we look at those pieces, if we have a community that we're growing incrementally over time, that's time tested, and we know that there's what that next increment of development looks like in our community, do we need to go through 8 months of uncertainty to get to the next approval process? Do we need to go and do all the analyses that we would do for an untested product versus something we've seen that's been time tested in our community? So when we look at growth, that expansive growth that's going out is because we've developed a process that makes that the easier development pattern to go out. At Strong Towns, and I'll show you tonight some of the numbers, what we see in those areas is that type of suburban development. What we have now traded off, not only is it more fragile, it's actually costing us more money in the long run to maintain those areas. So when we see cities grow and expand, when they seek annexation, there is this initial sugar high of the next growth of development. We have new residents, we have new tax base, but at each one of those, we have liabilities that we're bringing on board. So I'm sure Frederick is like many other cities, that every budget cycle, there is a struggle of how we're going to maintain all of the infrastructure, all the parks, all the buildings that we have accumulated over years and years and years. When we look at how that revenue comes in, we see that within our cities, there are places that actually generate a higher rate of return that consumes less resources than others. And we see that in all different types of places, usually in the historic core downtown. If somebody was to build a new development on the edge of town, the developer may initially go and pay for all the roads, extend all the pipes, but there's millions of dollars of liabilities that they gladly hand over to the city to take on forever. So they have to be repaved. The pipes have to be fixed. When we look at what the tax revenue generated for each one of those lots, it is generally not generating enough tax revenue to cover those liabilities. If we think about development in the core downtown, areas where you already have infrastructure, you already have roads and pipes, and you allow for something to be built there, it's a much higher rate of return because you're not taking on any additional liabilities. So at strong towns, we would call that traditional pattern thickening up. So where in your communities, if you're under this immense development pressure and you know that expanding out increases the liabilities that we're going to see in generations in the future, or we have to borrow from the future to make bills due today, where are the places in town where we already have the roads, we already have the pipes, that we can allow for infill, that we can allow for the next increment of development to occur, that we would see in that traditional pattern? And if we can't do that quickly, what are the barriers that we've put on ourselves to prevent that? We've seen some analysis. There's a brilliant researcher in Windsor, Canada. Her name is Sarah Kipner. She started a process of analyzing in Windsor, Canada, where housing could occur. Now, Windsor has the same growth pressures as Frederick, but it does not have the benefit of expanding out. They can't grow the city any further, but they need to deal with housing. And nobody's going to bulldoze a residential block to put in more housing. So she created a software called ADU Search, so Accessory Dwelling Unit Search. She ran all of their zoning codes, all their lot plans, and they found in the city of Windsor there were about 70,000 or 60,000 residential parcels in the city. Then she asked a simple question: if we were to take all that housing, how many of those could you go and add an accessory unit, an accessory apartment? So a rear yard cottage, something over a garage, an addition to a house, something in a backyard or a basement. And then what if you were to take a large house? We have aging population. They're looking to downsize. They're dealing with loneliness epidemic. What if we were to go in those areas and allow people to go and carve out one of those rooms in their house as an accessory apartment? So allow them to put a bathroom, maybe a little kitchenette in there. If they were to do that in Windsor, what she found is with 70,000 lots, they could actually generate almost 60,000 additional residential units without an additional pipe, road, park, police, fire, any of those pieces. Now, of course, nobody is hearing Windsor today as the growing metropolis of ADUs, but think about your demand in your cities. What if you could achieve 1% or 0.5% of that? You could thicken up your communities where wealth would stay in the community. You could provide housing choice where people are looking for those pieces. So you can tackle availability and affordability all in an area. And instead of relying on the 3-letter developer that has a billboard on the highway, you've now empowered over 70,000 residents in your community to explore this as an option. So the struggle there wasn't the rules, it was where do we get started? Yeah.
So we're in the midst of an ADU discussion as a city.
Yeah.
So the among others, two big barriers are the reality or perception of if we don't give the ADU 1 or 2 parking spaces, we're going to be choked off with parking. The contrast is no, not everybody's going to need a car. But I'm interested in your perspective on that, and then also the impact fees on water, sewer, schools, parks, and whether Windsor, if you know, waived all those fees or said, well, because there are more people potentially, then there are impacts on the system that we need to recover. So those two issues, impact fees and parking in particular.
Yeah. We had this discussion in Norman, Oklahoma. They were struggling with housing. So at Strong Towns, all the planners use this term ADU, accessory dwelling unit. We try not to use that at Strong Towns because when we go out and we talk about ADU, people think that's a rash you need a cream for. right? You can't relate to that as a person. All of a sudden you think that it's like a housing unit, like a product, like a Ford Chevy. So we have strategically used the language of Strong Towns as a rear yard cottage, backyard cottage, accessory apartment, trying to use terms that people can humanize with. So, because nobody says nobody wants to be accessory and nobody says they live in a dwelling. So working through that language, that helps to build familiarity because there are probably many of these that already exist in your community that nobody knows about. Right, the person's didn't pull permits, but has the basement apartment. They've converted that extra space into that rental unit. In Norman, Oklahoma, they were very concerned about the utilities. What would be the impact on water and sewer in the city? They were also very concerned about the cars and parking. And you have to know Norman, Oklahoma, it is a college town. They believe that anything is done for college students will bring this unbearable breed of human beings from Texas with dually pickup trucks that only know how to park in front yards. So ADUs were going to result in all these Texan students coming to the university with their dually pickup trucks, parking in everybody's front yard. So we worked with the city to do some analyzation when it came to the utilities. We asked a simple question. If I was to go on a house and add a ground floor suite, I want a master bedroom with a big tub that I can fill up with 100 gallons of water and soak in, and I want to put in a wet bar in the bedroom and do all of those things, what type of permit would we need for utilities? And so we don't need that. We get the water and sewer bill because it's an expansion of the house. We've already calculated that all the houses are going to need more than what we put in the books. So we have plenty of capacity. And in fact, in some of the neighborhoods, they told us they had been very good engineers with belts and suspenders in the systems. And they found out that they actually didn't have enough water flowing to the sewer pipes. So by people adding a couple extra showers in the neighborhood, that would actually help them and help flush the sewer lines out. So we tackled the utility question. So when we looked at that, now what would be the difference if we just took that, instead of being attached to the house, we separated it by 10 feet into the backyard? And they said, well, as long as it's on the same meter as the house, we don't care. And most folks that do these, they don't want to bicker over utility bills. They're going to just manage it. It's going to be part of the rent. They figured those pieces out. So when it comes to those sort of impact fees that are put up for that kind of expansion, those are one-time fees that actually don't help the system that you have because it doesn't provide the long-term continual resource for all the maintenance of that system. So when we looked in Norman, Oklahoma, the utility department said, yeah, we're not concerned about those additions because it's really not that big of an impact. It's no different than an addition on a house. And we would feel very comfortable with those pieces in. And we were able to get support from the utility department to then convince the planners that utilities were not a problem. So we look at those sorts of impacts. That's important to think through. I know in a lot of places, impact fees, we have it in my community where if you want to do a rear cottage on a house, you're paying the same impact fee as you are for a brand new house. And again, a very orderly system. We're going to run through those pieces, but that is one-time dollars that all that is doing is covering infrastructure that we can't fund somewhere else. And it's one-time money coming in. So we feel good we have that revenue, but it is an extraction out of those pieces and it increases the cost, making it harder for people to pay. The other thing with those fees is that the time that we ask people to pay for those fees are at the highest risk for the builder. So if you are trying to build something, if you don't have a proof of concept and it's going to take you 6 months to build that, you have to come up with cash. The bank's not going to lend you money. They're going to require you to pay very high interest or not lend at all for those pieces versus at the end when you actually have proof of concept. So on the permitting fees and those sorts of things, we've seen communities go and defer those until the end of the built piece Yeah.
Yeah, ADUs, I think, are one good tool in the toolkit. But around here, one of the big opportunities that we haven't taken advantage of is all of the unused land we have in parking lots and places where we park cars, new cars, used
Yeah.
cars, junk cars. East Frederick, we got lots of land, we put lots of housing there. And so what would you say, how do we get more of
Well,
our
let's-
land on, more of our housing on some of this underutilized land?
Yeah, so when we look at parking, same with the rear yard cottages. When we look at the idea of a rear yard cottage and we look at where those would go, or if we convert a basement into a apartment, some sort of walkout apartment, what they found in Norman, Oklahoma is that they're concerned about a dually parking in the front yard wasn't a zoning enforcement issue. Because what is the zoning officer going to do? They're not going to go from City Hall and walk out and issue tickets. It's a parking enforcement issue. And we know how to do parking enforcement really well in communities. The other thing is that in these communities where they were looking at these small rear cottages, the people that are making that investment generally have ownership in the neighborhood or the home. So they're figuring this stuff out on the ground. At Starklands, we've done a lot of writing on parking. All of our cities are overparked. I'm sure it may not feel like it, but I'm sure in Frederick there are 10 parking spaces for me right now within a 15-minute walk of where we're sitting. When we look at the map, you have a lot of excess parking. So when you're thinking through that process of parking, when you have a choice of where development goes, working to help people vision what the potential is for a parking lot in the downtown versus building new development on the edge of town, we have to look, if I'm going to put effort in as a community, where am I going to get the highest rate of return forever on a piece of property? Is it on the edge of town where I have to extend resources and drive more parking to the core downtown? Or is it thickening up the downtown where we have excess parking and the infrastructure already exists that we could fill in? So in every city, there's sensitivities on the parking components. I assure you, if you can pay a lot of money for a lot of studies, there's probably more parking than you need in downtown Frederick. You can do a lot of studies with that, but you can also go and look in those areas. And I would ask property owners, what is the barrier? And many times when I talk to incremental developers, the first barrier is they actually don't know where to start. So why is there a parking lot in the middle of downtown that hasn't been developed with all the vibrant restaurants and the work happening here? It's probably because the person that owns that piece of property doesn't know where to start. And you're at City Hall is where they would be calling to figure out what they can do on the property. And I've talked to many, many property owners, and most of them don't really know what that true value is for their property, and they've not been introduced to the person that knows how to leverage that piece. Yeah.
Have you found in some of the other communities like Norman, Oklahoma, that there's a strong technical assistance piece to get the idea of possibility into action and actually doing it through the planning department? Or, what are they doing that takes it from the idea stage to being possible?
Yeah. What I would do in local government is I would actually draw what was possible on a piece of property. So for some reason in local government, we are so adverse to failure that we're not willing to take some of those initial risks. And I would get my hand slapped. So my background is in architecture. I found that I could do a development application would come in. I could spend 2 weeks to write the 16-page report of why it doesn't work with all those code pieces. Or I could spend an hour with some markers and draw what it would look like if it met the code. And it'd be the same amount of stuff, if not more, on a piece of property. And I would get berated by the planning director. You can't do that. The city attorney would give me a quote I had to put on there. This is illustrative and all those sorts of pieces. But what I would tell you is that by showing people where to start and what was possible, I worked in communities that hadn't seen development in 30 years. And folks began to develop because they just knew where to start. In all of our communities, we have millions of dollars sitting on the sidelines that people want to invest in your community. You'll see in neighborhoods that feel neglected, the broken windows, the unpainted houses. You'll see tall grass in the yard. Well, if you have one house like that across the street, the people start to question, well, if my neighbor is not going to paint their house and mine needs to be painted, I'm probably not going to make that investment. I have the money to go to Home Depot and buy the paint, but why would I make that investment? And we're finding in communities across the country that money is sitting on the sidelines. So by drawing where it could go is one strategy. The other is that I don't know if there's been the experience here, but there are a lot of first-time developers or property owners that come to a community and they say, hey, I have a vision for something on a piece of property. And after talking to hundreds of small incremental developers, what they told us is that when they were trying to figure out where to start, what they actually wish cities would do was just tell them no when they first walk in the door. No, we don't want you to build here. No, that project isn't possible. But in fact, what they had is instead of hitting a wall, they found that they hit a tangle. So when they go to City Hall and they say, hey, I'd like to build something here, the planner's like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. Or the building official says, well, that's great. You know, we have a pre-application process. And I just talked to a developer, property owner out in Oregon who just paid, it was like $2,800 for a pre-application meeting for him to get a one-page paper for them to tell him that he couldn't do what he wanted to do on his property. And then they were nice enough to fly a drone over his house and cite him for code enforcement violations. That is the tangle that we're asking people to make an investment in our community. The cities that are starting to untangle that, what they have shifted from a mindset of gatekeeping, because your planning staff, your building officials, your zoning officials, they are the premier experts in your community of the code. I'm sure if I asked whoever your planner is here, they probably can give you chapter and verse of every part of the code. It takes years for the engineers and the planners on the private side to understand all those pieces. What we were hearing from all these small developers is when they went to City Hall, they got caught in this tangle. What they really needed help for is guidance of how to get to yes. I found that I could draw stuff to show them how to get to yes. And it was take it or leave it, but we could visualize it. And I will tell you more often than not, I worked with the same developers that are working up here. They would come to my office after I drew something like that a few weeks later with a different team moving forward on that project in places that development otherwise would not have happened. But even at cities, just working through the codes, what would it take? We have an empty parking lot around the corner, privately owned. What would it take? What are the 4 steps that you would need to take to go get a building that looks like what's on either side of that parking lot to be built? What are the steps? That simple exercise is something every city could do. A lot of cities are going after what they call pre-approved or pre-reviewed building plans. So they're hiring an architecture group to come in and give them a whole set of really beautiful plans. That's great. I really like that. I think lots of cities should do it. But what's more impressive in that process is that when you're in those pre-approved plan processes, it is, for many cities, the first time that every department within your municipality is going start to finish through the entire development process. And there's not a developer, so we can't say this is a money-grabbing, big D, attorney, developer. This is the type of housing we want. A lot of the cities are doing it. They're picking architectural plans that are cute, so it looks like everything in the neighborhood. So, okay, it's not an ugly thing. It's not a barracks. It looks like something in our community, and they're going through that process. And I'll give you an example. My dear friend in Kalamazoo, Michigan, as planner, she went through and did the pre-approved building plan process in Kalamazoo. And she took the plan set to every department, just as if she was the developer, but there was no developer and no pressure. And she told everybody that we're here to align City Hall behind the type of housing we want. Everybody said, oh, these are cute plans. They look like the houses that used to be in the community. We could see how they fit. They were the right size to fit on the lot, so they matched all the pieces, and she took it to each department. The first barrier she hit was that the zoning department said, we can't approve that because our minimum lot size under our zoning code is 60 feet wide. And our historic plat in the neighborhood are 48 feet wide. So she said, okay, that's a barrier. She wrote down that barrier, and then she took an ordinance to the city council, the next council meeting, to abolish minimum lot sizes in the downtown. Then she went and talked to the zoning department, and they met with the fire marshal, and they said, oh my gosh, we have a conflict in the code. Our building setbacks under the zoning code for our downtown won't allow those small little houses you want on the lots, because our side setbacks on each lot have to be 15 feet. So you do the math, 48 minus 30 is not much of a house. It'd look really silly, right? And the fire marshal said, well, I don't know why you're using that. I'm the fire marshal. We have a 10-foot building separation. Guess what? When you historically went through the whole town, every building in the tight downtown was between 10 and 12 feet apart. So this whole feel of this concern of failure, like who's going to take responsibility for it? Well, my friend who's managing this process said, okay, we have the planning department. Where did that setback requirement come from? Well, I don't know. It's in the code. It went like 1968 was done. And then she asked the fire marshal, where did your code come from? Oh, well, we've done fire codes and this. And all you could just see was his badge shining. You know, like, here's the authority. Who's going to say that the fire marshal is wrong? It is the ideal dimension. So they said, okay, can we defer to the fire marshal for the justification for our building setbacks? And the planning department said, great, we'd love to see that. The fire marshal, they have a shiny badge. Everybody loves the fire marshal. Nobody's going to fight safety. So again, wrote another little ordinance, took it next month to the city council for that. It went through every department. It went through utilities. Utilities, she didn't have to write an ordinance. She went to show, imagine a cute little narrow house with a big porch on the front. And the utility department said denied. She goes, wait a minute, you're the water and sewer department. Why are you denying this house? You just need to get a pipe to it. I said, well, you don't know. You're a planner. We're pipe people. We have to, but in the building code, are required to have a sewer clean out 18 inches off the front of the house. If you put a porch on the front of the house, that means the sewer clean out is under the porch, and we can't access that if we need to clean out the sewer. And she said, well, why is the sewer pipe in the middle of the house? And they said, well, because we don't trust you zoning people. You've changed all the lot sizes. When we put the pipes in the ground, where did they go? And she goes, I don't know, where do they go? He goes, well, we just didn't know. So every time we do a sewer line, our standard is to put the sewer and the water in the middle of the lot. That way you can choose whatever you want, and then we'll just figure out if you're going to have a porch or a stoop. And she said, well, what if you did like every other city and we respected the grid that we had and we realigned our zoning code because we've already written the ordinance to get the right lot sizes? What if we just set the policy that every time you run a sewer line, you're going to run that on that property line of those original platted lots? And then every time a new building comes in, you'll make sure that lines up. That way, that sewer clean out is not on the dead center of the house, it's on the side. Seems silly as we talk through it, but that was a policy thing that she didn't have to go to council. They just rewrote the policy in the utility department, and the utility department changed the whole way they did business overnight to now break through those pieces. So that's, yeah.
Sorry, does she work for the city of Kalamazoo? How do we get someone like that?
Yeah, there's lots of people like that. What's really amazing is not only was she the planner, they actually promoted her to assistant city manager at Kalamazoo. So I've been in local government a lot. I don't know very many planners that have a long shelf life because development is such a tricky place, but she got a promotion out of it. She's now teaching at the University of Notre Dame, teaching students and professionals how to do this. But there are but this process as a citizen, we don't have to look far for these pieces. We can simply go through and ask, what is the starting point to get the type of development we want? And walking through each department, when I said I would draw things, I cut my teeth in 2010 at the epicenter of the mortgage crisis in Florida. So where you saw that properties became negative in value, that's where I was working. And I was in a redevelopment agency, in a growth management department, in an anti-growth county where there was no money, and people would, the night before their homes were being foreclosed on, would sell all the copper out of the house. It was that type of environment. And what I found there is that if I could draw and show people what was possible, every time I would find a barrier, I could get a letter of determination. We could redo the codes. We could work through those things to help people know where to start. And that doesn't take any special skill set. You don't even have to have a really good personality. You just have to have the ability to do what you know how to do at City Hall, to take a set of plans from desk to desk and identify where the barriers are for the type of development you want. Because the type of development that people dislike, that they show up and protest against, are actually the ones that are in your comprehensive plan, that are under the zoning rules, that are easy to get funding for. We've inverted what is easy to do in our communities. Yeah.
So you commented that you just have to show where the barriers are. And I would offer it's not just the barriers, but how to do something about them, right? Where to take it and what to do to get a resolution. I mean, finding them is one thing,
Yeah.
but it's taking it to that next step to get a resolve.
Yeah, of course. So local government is really tricky, right? The city council doesn't want to deal with planning issues, so they create a planning commission. Like there are all these layers of organizations, and there's departments. So I may talk about planners, and then there may actually be a zoning department. Or I may talk about a building official, but then there's an inspector department. Or the inspections that you do here may not actually be in the city. It may be deferred to somewhere else. As citizens, trying to understand where the authority has been placed in your city. We have a local conversation in Steubenville, Ohio. Steubenville, so at Strong Towns, we have across the country, we have over 300 groups, and you have one here in Frederick, where Strong Towns members are meeting on a regular basis. They're learning how to gather as a group. They're learning how to communicate, and then they're learning how to advocate. And in Steubenville, Ohio, they are not seeing growth. They're struggling in the downtown. Even when they talk to elected officials, even the elected officials didn't know which department to talk to. So their local conversation did this cool little bubble diagram. It's got some funny name to it, and it eludes me, but it's a bunch of bubbles. And in each bubble, there's a string to the authority. So it's this cool map of the whole city. And then they can type in it, okay, who has the authority to look at budget? And in comes that bubble. And who is it subsidiary to? Jacob Hyman at our Steubenville local conversation, he's going to present that at our CivicCon conference in Pensacola, but he's presented it, we've shared it a couple of times on our website. That's the first starting point. So you don't want to show up to the Parks and Rec committee to complain about fencing when fencing starts out either at the council or at a planning commission meeting. So citizens, that's the first place. Where do we need to go? Who actually has the authority to do that? And even I find I coach lots of elected officials that are especially new to the role. And it's unfortunate that many times they get in that position and then they're handed the big book and say, oh, here's the ordinance. Here's the charter of the city. Hope you figured that out. And guess what? Next week we're going to talk budget. So doing that helps to do those things. And what they found in Steubenville, they had committees that weren't staffed. Like they had committees that had authority to do something, but it had been so long ago and the city had kind of been in decline that here's the committee that could actually or the board that could do that thing or where that should happen, and nobody was there. And that then changed the conversation in their community. Do we need that group? Because if we do, we have a whole group of people in this local conversation meeting every month that would love to join that and take on that responsibility. Or maybe we've actually hired a bunch of people and created some other departments, and we just forgot that in the ordinance in 83 we had this piece that we no longer need. And again, it's just an action of cleaning up the books. So that's kind of the first piece. So when you think through that process, are you thinking through these items as a citizen? I'd like to do something. Where am I getting stuck? Or are you thinking about it from technical staff? Am I working through, we would love to see this, but I know that Chapter 12, 3B is one of the sticking points. Norman, Oklahoma, parking was a big deal for them. They had 23 parking categories on their parking table, and sororities and fraternities had 2 different rates. I don't know what occurred that separated the two, but they spent years fighting over all of that. What they found is at like the last minute, the city attorney and one of the council members were just so frustrated with the process that the only recommendation that was coming out of this was to hire a consultant, to pay somebody to tell them what the next table should be. And being a college town, they had more people than opinions, and so nothing moved forward. What they found there is within that code, by changing one word of the code from required to recommended, they could amend the parking code and not deal with the tables. And they could empower the development community and staff and the council to look at each project and move it forward. They carried that forward as their next smallest step when they did their rear yard ADU ordinance. There were 4 things in their code they had to update. The 5th one they never thought they would be able to get, and it was parking. Because they thought they'd had to account for parking. They went to the council and a very divisive community. Lots of people show up whenever there's change. They had 5 minor changes, text changes on the table. They were going to focus in one neighborhood, not the whole city, and they presented to council. And one council member said, "What's that 5th one? Why are we getting hung up on parking? Didn't we just deal with that?" And then another council member said, "Well, why aren't we doing this across the whole city? I've heard no complaints about anybody in the city." Those 2 amendments were done on the floor, a unanimous vote, and it has resulted in building in that community. But it's that type of iterative processing that is really important.
Let me take a minute. I get the honor of introducing our mayor.
Michael O'Connor, welcome to Frederick.
Great, thank you, Mayor.
You're not from too far away if you spent some time in Ransom, West Virginia. So
Yes.
I suspect this is not your first visit to our community, but we're delighted to have you here.
Every time I come up here, it's great. I really
We
enjoy
agree.
it. And I've seen the changes. I moved to West Virginia in 2016, and I remember coming up here one of the first years we were here. My oldest was about this big and went to the theater on the weekend to see a Mr. Rogers show, and there was like one choice of restaurant in the downtown at the time. Now we come up here and we have to like battle on like, oh my gosh, which of the 60? Like what do we want? So seeing that type of work, what it shows me is that a place like Frederick provides great optimism in the work that I do in the built environment. So really exciting to be here.
I think we deal a little bit with that Yogi Berra-ism. Nobody wants to go downtown anymore because it's always so crowded.
Yeah, and that is a reasonable concern, but it's something to leverage, and it's a thing that as local leaders getting ahead of that messaging. And there's lots of downtowns that you don't want it to become stagnant. What we see in lots of cities is we see that growth pop up, change happens very quickly, and then there's this knee-jerk reaction that we want to put in a bunch of things to make it more orderly. And the thing with our most traditional parts of the city, oldest parts of the city that have been time tested, is that little bit of chaos, that messy bit. What we see in this core downtown, the historic part of the city, is what we would call a complex adaptive system. There are things that are evolving and emerging over time where people can make small bets. We can do little things. If we fail, we learn from it. If we make a small bet and it succeeds, we're going to be able to repeat it and do more of that. And we see that in these areas. When we look at that suburban development pattern on the edge, that small bet is now a 50-acre town center. And we didn't figure out how to do the entry to the parking lot right. But we've already put 30 million into an intersection. And it's like, those are those big numbers that get us stuck. And then what is our knee-jerk reaction? We create more rules and regulations to make it harder and harder to do that stuff, so we never make that mistake again. And that bleeds into these complex adaptive systems that make it harder for somebody to make that investment in our downtown.
I know
Yeah.
that, just a second. I know that these people have been putting out fires somewhere. This is our planning director, Everett.
Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you. Sorry I was late.
Yeah.
Gabrielle Collard, I'm the planning director here.
Great, thanks for being here.
Great to meet you.
Yeah, I told everybody early, I said, this is a real open conversation. I know everybody's busy. Everybody has stuff to do. So if you have to get up and leave, no problem. If you think somebody else needs to be here and you want to go grab them, you see them walk by, please do that. You're not going to bother me one bit.
I will need that mic. I'm sorry. I'm very soft-spoken. You draw a very attractive and, I think with your words, convincing picture of what could be established in the local government operation. And it would not be easy, also, by virtue of how you've described it.
I make it sound easy so that you want to explore it, but I tell you, I work with lots of cities.
You're making the argument at a difficult time, however, since the public is more wary of intensifying government activity. I can assume that that is the case at the local level as well. If it's not, it may become so. So I'm a little concerned that in this elaborate depiction and what would be a very complicated construction of a system within an internal local government, I'm concerned about what you do in those early, obviously time-consuming stages to bring the public in. Because you can get to that point, particularly when you're dealing with the traditional development mode, and fall flat on your face. If you're dealing with the suburban, the surrounding, the exterior and new coming development process, it's probably even more a better way to go, because you will be ahead of the game when the developer knocks at the door for the big empty field on the outskirts of your bordered town. But what do you do when those people in the traditional neighborhoods say, no, I'm not putting a little cottage in my backyard. It's my backyard.
Yeah. So,
And how early on do you initiate that process? Because I'm viewing it from a political perspective, believe that that will be the critical juncture. You'll have problems integrating the operation in the government, obviously. Again, particularly now, because there's a move away from centralization. But what do you do with the public?
when we think about the smallest increment of development, so in the community, every neighborhood is going to be slightly different. I would argue the suburban development is a complicated system. And when I'm talking to cities and I'm talking to folks that want to make investments in areas, the suburban areas and the greenfield stuff are actually the hardest areas to seek change. Because everything that has been built in the suburban development pattern, in the latest new subdivision, and it doesn't matter what it was marketed as, but the new suburban development has all been built to a finished state. And in those communities, those residents have the only two expectations of change in their community. They expect the landscaping to get bigger, and they expect the ability to change the paint color on their door. They're not expecting the corner store to pop up in their neighborhood. They're not expecting the two-story building to also become a three-story building. What we see in those areas, they are built out and they can't mature anymore. They can't thicken up. When we look at the traditional development pattern, what we need to think about in those areas is what is that local sensitivity for that next increment of development, and not a requirement, but the ability to. So when we talk about incremental development, there are 4 criteria when I'm talking about incremental development, whether it's a rear yard cottage or converting a large house into a small apartment building, or taking a small house here and converting the ground floor to some sort of commercial use. In every community, there is the next increment of development there's certain sensitivities to develop that. When we're talking about that type of development, the 4 criteria are: first, it results in money staying within the community. So when we talk about that type of development, what type of development would occur in a neighborhood that would stay in the community? Not a New York brokerage firm, not an out-of-state developer building a big thing, but in that community builds that up. The second component on that are areas that already have infrastructure. Where are there already roads and pipes and schools and parks that are in those areas, so we're not adding to the liability of our municipalities. Then we will look at the scale of development that contributes and fits in the block, doesn't expand out on it. So over the last 8 decades, there was very little trust in the communities on any type of development. We could have the best development come to town, but we only have seen 8 decades of development where everything that has been built has resulted in lesser quality than what was there before. So we had an agriculture area, and now we have a strip shopping mall. It's resulted in more traffic and trash and noise and all those places. We had this nice house, we bulldozed it so we could get this new business in, or a bigger house, and it doesn't look anywhere. It's now a CVS. These things don't match up. So when we talk about these sorts of things, what is in every neighborhood, that's going to scale differently. When I talk about incremental development in Boston, that is a 12-story building. That is the next increment. When I talk about incremental development in my community in Charlestown, that is putting a duplex on a property where there's now single-family homes. That is the next increment of development. So I'm running through these, and then as we look at that, so it fits in the neighborhood, it keeps the wealth in there, and the other piece to it, really the most critical one, and I know Frederick, being an older community, has this, it is repairing or addressing blight or disinvestment from the past. So in those areas that maybe we tore down for this aspirational thing, or maybe there's been disinvestment because of redlining, or because we focus our energy on the edge of town, where are the places that we could go in and start to stitch together? And it's really important when we talk about the next increment of development. So when we're talking about these things, what I'm speaking to here is that I think, and I see this in many places because of the developers we've talked to, incremental folks that are doing renovations, doing small infill stuff, those sorts of projects, they're telling us that it is almost impossible to do any development in those core areas. We've actually made it easier to do greenfield on the edge, where we're pushing people further out, we're making them have to drive back into our core downtown, or we're taking what should be investment in our core downtown and we're pushing it to the edge. We would think in areas that we have predictability and we have clearly identified what the next increment of development is, where infrastructure already exists, where folks can invest on their own property and increase the value, accumulate wealth on properties. Those are areas that should be the easiest of development in your community.
I just want to make one more
Yeah.
point that came to me when you mentioned in your 4 steps the funding being retained at the local level, the funding that could be raised,
Mhm.
presumably from nonprofits, not from Wall Street or developers. And I like that idea, but would that mean that there need to be more centralization of control of the planning process as a whole by the city government, so that an executive, the mayor, for instance, he has control over those funds?
No, when I'm talking about accumulating wealth, what we've seen in the traditional development pattern is that folks when they're building something, they're taking a risk. In the traditional development pattern, the private sector would take the risk first. They would build the house. So I'll show tonight a series of slides from Brainerd, Minnesota. And we have a lot of data from Brainerd, and I'm sure there are similar images here in Frederick. In the traditional development pattern, what we can see in Brainerd, Minnesota is that when that community formed, what you'll see is a series of buildings being built with no identifiable public infrastructure. We can be generous, you'll see in front of it a dirt street. I'll be generous in calling it that, but it's a series of small wooden shacks being built on a road. In Brainerd, Minnesota, as we move forward, we have another series of slides that show 30 years in the future, where on that same street, those one-story wooden shacks are now 2- and 3-story wood and brick buildings. When we look at the public infrastructure at that time, it's still a dirt street. There's a little bit of sidewalk, but that is then at the point that the municipality has put forward the fire brigade, the police department, water and sewer. As we look at those slide sets, those small wooden shacks are now the next block of development out. So we're going up, and as we go out, there are those small beds. Over time, some of those buildings and property owners are going to fail. They're going to foreclose. Some are going to have windfalls. They're going to be accumulating that wealth in that area. We can see in Brainerd, Minnesota, over 90 years, they go from small wooden shacks to tall stone masonry buildings in their downtown, where they've grown up and out in that downtown because they've accumulated the private wealth. Each one of those investments has added value to the community. The community then, in that development pattern, as the property values increase because people have made an initial investment, their wooden shack is now a big stone building. The value of the property goes up. The city is now generating more tax. Once they create that tax, it's not until almost 90 years into Brainerd's history until the library and city hall are built. Now let's contrast that to our suburban development patterns. What is the very first thing we ask all developers to do before we issue a single building permit for a house? We ask them to build the stormwater area. We ask them to build all the roads. We ask them to put in all the pipes. And then maybe we even require them to put in the pool and clubhouse because we've had a couple of those developers that have never done that. As soon as those are built, everything but the clubhouse, the developer then hands that over to the city to take all the responsibility on. That's day one. In those subdivisions, we're talking about $20 and $30 million worth of infrastructure that has now just been handed over to the municipality. The grading is a wash. We're never going to have to regrade it. But the pipes have a 80-year life. The roads have a 25-year life. When did the first buildings get built? 3 years after the roads. Well, we see, if we're lucky, the first of the tax bills come in. So what we've inverted in our modern development pattern on the edge is we're asking all of us as taxpayers and citizens to take the risk and hoping all that development comes in. And what we're seeing in that development, because we're asking a new developer to do all the things we want. We want to see the road that's wide enough so the fire trucks can get down and we can park on street. We want the best stormwater because we're in the Chesapeake Bay area. We want to be sure we have all the landscaping, shaded trees, the 6-foot or 8-foot sidewalks. We have all of that stuff that's built all day one with no buildings on it. And we are holding the risk. At Strong Towns, we're asking folks to think differently about that. When we look at the traditional pattern, we have found that in those traditional cities up into our, and I'll give you some dates in there, but we really see after World War II where this really hits off. When we see in those places, we have set up the responsibility of all the cities to take all the risks, not the individuals. So when we're talking about accumulating wealth, we want to see that gradual increase of property values so people can reinvest into it. We want to see that occur at a gentle pace so that we're not pushing people out and displacing them. We want people to have the ability. When you drive around Frederick and on my tour today, you still have large, almost single-family homes in the middle of your downtown that have been there for 100 years because they've never matured up beyond the grand home that were there. That is a choice of that property owner. They're accumulating a different level of wealth than that, but it's on the whole neighborhood, those pieces are coming up. So when I walk around Frederick, and I have to warn people, I go out and do like walking tours and audits. My family stopped going around with me on it because I've ruined their view of the world. When you go and you see things for the first time, then you can't unsee it. So when we walk around, like I love going to older communities because when I go walk around, we can see all the lessons of what worked and what didn't work. We can see all of these things real life and experience it and know how this is happening. And I know that there was no one single moment in this community that led to where it's at. Now, I will show you tonight where some other cities, where they have a group out of Asheville, North Carolina, their firm is called Urban 3. They do productivity mapping for communities. So there's one measure we can look at to see where is our highest returning properties in the city. And they do a little analysis called value per acre. So when we look at properties, everybody has a different, like, just go to the real estate pages. Every house in your neighborhood has a different sale price. But when you take the value of that or the tax assessment value of that and divide it by the acreage it's on, we can begin to equalize a measurement in our communities. What we find in the work that they do, we can find the areas that are the most productive in your city. And I suspect, off of doing this many, many times in cities, when we look right here at the crossroads, we're going to find that this center area of Frederick is probably the highest performing value per acre in the city, if not the entire county. As we go out and things are further apart, there's more infrastructure, we're going to see those value per acres drop. They've also, Urban 3's also done some analysis, and I'll show you a couple of cities where they've said, okay, everything's making money for the city. Everybody's paying their taxes, and if you don't, the sheriff will come and collect the money. So the cities are always going to generate revenue. What if we take that and test that against all of the services we provide those properties? What does it cost for police and fire? What are the roads, the pipes, all of those costs? And we can see in a visual way the return on investment for your city. And what you'll see in some of those images tonight is that there are areas that will outperform. They'll be paying more in taxes than what they are consuming in services in your city. And then there'll be large areas in your community that are actually paying less in taxes than what they're consuming in services. And cities, you can do all different types of ratios for it. We try to balance all that out. It's actually not fair that there are folks in the middle of town here. Like we talked about impact fees. What are the impact fees for a house on a road that's been there for 200 years? Like, you're not going to widen the road here to increase capacity. And we're assuming that you're now going to go on the edge of town over on 15 and drive through the on-off ramps 12 times a day in that piece. Like that's where that mapping comes in. But when we look at those pieces, we can see the productivity of property in your city. So I'll show some maps like that tonight. And if you can't be there tonight, I've got some cards up here. My email is edward@strongtowns.org. Happy to send you those slides or direct you to that work. If you go to Urban 3, they have a lot of mapping on their site for places, and they've done lots of presentations of this work. But the takeaway is that there are choices in our land pattern that are more productive than others. So we talk about thickening up a neighborhood. It's not about density. It's really about where is that next increment of development. So when somebody wants to make that investment, they can do that. And when they do it, it is within the context of the block at the most local level, not just a colossal building on a corner. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to try to figure out how to phrase this in a way that makes sense. So we have in Frederick, we go back over 250 years. We have a lot of federal architecture. We have some Victorian architecture. I live in a neighborhood that's mostly post-war Cape Cods. When we talk about neighborhood character, and we have a lot of historical people here, so I don't mean to offend, but But throughout history, we've had different architectural styles. And it's my observation that we aren't leaving space for the next architectural style, for, the next Frank Lloyd Wright to come. And so what we end up having, again, in my observation with new building, is sort of a bland interpretation of federal architecture that has like fake shutters and vinyl siding, and it looks the same as it does in Colorado Springs, as it does anywhere else. So how do we legislate, put into our code, space for better quality architecture that's true to this place and not just sort of blandly replicating in the past? So I'm going to hold that for just a moment. I'm currently kind of obsessed with cul-de-sac in Tempe, Arizona, the concept.
Yeah.
And so this place is a completely walkable neighborhood. There's no vehicles, there's no roads, there's only paths. And so I was imagining somebody presenting that here in Frederick to the, council or whatever, and there's no way that could be built here. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm very new to this. So my question really is like, how do we make space for the next iteration of what's new? Because we could have the most incredible architects in the world and they want to build in Frederick and people would be like, no, that doesn't work here. Like, we don't have any mechanisms for really good architecture here.
Yeah. Cul-de-sac is a really great project to look at. And people look at it for all different types of reasons. It's in Tempe, Arizona. It's in eyesight of Sky Harbor. It's surrounded by a lot of kind of industrial things. So it's, if you've been to the Phoenix area in the middle of summer, I don't know why any humans would be there. It's that type of environment. So when people come up here and be, oh, it's cold. No, like, go there when it's 110 or 120 degrees, that you lose your breath because the air is so dry. The interesting thing about cul-de-sac is not the architecture or the fact that there are no cars in it. The thing that's most interesting to me about cul-de-sac is they decoupled parking and building. So they didn't require any parking. You have to take a blood oath when you rent there that you'll never own a car, because this is one of the zoning things, like, how do we do that? But what is most fascinating, and they're doing that group, is I think 2 or 3 other projects in the country. When they decoupled the car, so when you look at the built environment and just look at your parking garages, we have this American architecture that is based off of the 10 by 20 box for a car, right? Our streets are based off of the width of the car. It's based off the parking. Our houses have the big garage in the front. It's based off the dimension. Even the townhomes, I'm going to call them the snout ones, but the townhomes with the garages in the front or the one in the back. In Morgantown, in Wheeling, West Virginia, they've built 12-foot wide townhomes because they've decoupled the parking. If you try to get a developer around here to do that, they won't do that because they want to be sure you can get the car and a stair up into the building because it's the car dimension. What they did in Tempe with cul-de-sac is they said, we're going to decouple. What happens if we design a community where we decouple the parking? Well, the first thing is the developer was actually able to start because they could build small pieces at a time as the market worked. So they're like 50 or 60 small little building quads all over the site. And they could build 4 or 5 at a time. So from a financial standpoint, they were able to get a start doing a couple of buildings, got the revenue generated, went to the bank, refinanced, did the next phase, got the money refinanced to do the next phase. So it wasn't done all at once. There's some economy in that when we think about building. So they were able to get lower pricing on those pieces, phasing that out. They also found that once they could do these smaller pieces, if you look around the area, the other building are these giant boxes. And all of them have these huge air conditioner units on the front and fancy things on the roof to try to cool the buildings. What they found is, well, if we don't have to deal with the car dimension and we can deal with the human, we're this big, we can do all this kind of incremental moving things around. The architects are called like the cranky streets. By rotating each of those buildings, because we're not glued to any of those parking pieces, we can actually rotate the buildings in a way that provide natural shading, where they're seeing something like 30 degrees cooler in the courtyard spaces in that entire area. This is not new science. This is a traditional development pattern that once we remove all of the gizmo green and once we remove the car, we could do that building. So it would be very difficult in a place like Frederick to try to do all of the traditional architectural details if the measurement you're starting with is the measurement of the car. So the takeaway for some place like Frederick is let's think about how do we decouple the parking. And there are many ways to do that. Like we can go through and figure out how to decouple the parking. At Strongtowns, we're really advocate about abolishing parking mandates. I just was on a meeting with the ITE, who are the people that write the standards for parking. And they're like, yeah, we have a code book that tells people in cities how many parking spaces they recommend for stuff, and it's wrong. Like, look at their cities. We don't need as much parking that we've regulated, and they're looking to change that. So the top professionals that are providing this are open to those ideas. So in the city, how do we start to decouple that? And we had one of our strongest town communities. They had a downtown. Their city was challenged with, they thought they had to spend $30 million, which they didn't have, to build a parking garage to support the 4 blocks of development in the downtown. And they were told if they build that, then all the other development would come. If you zoomed out of the map, out of the 4 blocks, the 5th and 6th blocks away were complete surface parking lots. But nobody wanted to come downtown because it was like, it's scary. I have to walk through a parking lot to this thing. The mayor came up with a really cool idea. He said, why don't we just do valet parking? And it was like, valet parking, like our little downtown? He goes, yeah, for like 15 grand, we could do a 2-year pilot program. We can offer free valet parking. We'll put somebody at every single corner. Everybody that comes downtown, we'll hire all these 18-year-olds that are looking for jobs, and you walk right in front, you hand somebody your keys, they'll drive it the 2 blocks away and park it, and then we'll see what happens. And we're not going to spend $30 million. The 15 is what we would have to spend on another study to tell us how to finance this or how to bond it. They did that, and what happened in the downtown is all of a sudden it became this thing. You could go downtown and get your car valeted. Like, how cool is that? And like people, they the first time they went down, they would just go to the restaurant inn and out to their car. Then they're like, wait a minute, we could walk across the street. It resulted in the next blocks being redeveloped without any subsidy from the city. They were utilizing an underutilized resource in the community. After the 2-year project, the pilot, the city made their initial investment. All the business owners said, this is like nothing for us. This is like a small percentage off of our liquor sales from one night of the week. And we're having all these people fill our places, and this is really cool. Nobody else in the region has this. They took it on, and they're just utilizing those resources. So there's those ideas. Lots of cities are doing shared parking. So how do you decouple? And I know there's a dozen kind of barriers that would come to that. But in cul-de-sac, what I like most about that is that decoupling. And there's lots of cities that have dealt with those pieces. When it comes to the architectural styles and design, I went to school, I searched hard and long for a school that taught traditional architecture. Like, I did not like glass boxes. I didn't like doing artsy things. I was like, a building is a box, and I need to know where the rooms are. That's my mindset. As a kid, we would travel all up and down the East Coast. I fell in love with all the traditional architecture. Put me in front of columns, and I'm going gaga on this stuff. And what I loved is as I go in the country, I'd find different regional alterations to each of those architectural styles. I just found that language to be really amazing. In many places, because we don't trust developers, in the places where we want to see development, we have overlaid another series of restrictions that are preventing development from happening. In many places, that is that Historic Preservation Board, it's the Design Review Committee, it's these sorts of layers that it's another barrier. I'm not advocating to abolish anything that you have until we build up the trust on pieces. But there are ways to express the architectural styles and characters of your community because people have to relearn that. There are only 2 schools in the country that are teaching traditional architecture. The architects don't know how to do the things that you see in your community. So to ask them to emulate what you see in your community is a difficult ask to the architectural profession. So that is something we have to acknowledge. Cities across the country have done architectural pattern books as textbooks to celebrate the architecture that they have. So Norfolk, Virginia, they did an architectural pattern book, and beautiful book, showed all the styles, showed massing, taught people about those pieces. And then what they did is they got it printed out in newsprint, like a big piece, and they gave it out Sunday morning to on everybody got the Sunday paper. Now this goes back 25 years when people got newspapers, but imagine every doorstep in Norfolk, Virginia getting the architectural pattern book of their community, and they could walk out and see on their house, oh, I'm this architectural style. It also helped the builders in that community to understand the massing for a Victorian home is dramatically different than a massing for a craftsman home. And the builders, especially the production builders, get it all messed up. So this is helping in those pieces. So there are ways to educate the public. There are ways in, I just talked to a city in Maine that they were struggling with architecture, and a small community, the New Englanders, they're like very regimented, and everything has to happen at City Hall. And City Hall is actually in the same building as the post office, and it's rural Maine, so everybody has to go to the post office to get their mail. It's sort of like your corridor here. So imagine at the end of the corridor is your P.O. box, and the front of the corridor is City Hall where you can go and complain. They went and put posters of all of the historic homes of the city with a little note there, like this is Miss Rosie's home, built in 1832. It's this type of style. They put those posters in the hallway. They were also trying to show that a lot of the homes in their community were small apartment buildings and mixed use buildings. So they put that in there. That passive celebration of their community in the corridor that all those New Englanders had to walk by, when people started talking about the architectural styles and the building types, they had a reference, because it's like a duplex is scary, but Miss Rosie's house on Maple Street, I love that. I've walked past there since a kid. How can we get more of that? So that shift, and it brilliant move by the planner that just went and spent an afternoon doing some research and doing some printouts. And I'm sure whatever was in the hallway before must have been really bad. It really added to that experience. So when we talk about those styles, trying to educate folks on it, sharing it, a lot of Main Street programs will do things like virtual walking tours, talking about the architectural piece, helping people understand what those pieces are. If you want to see new developments, a lot of new developments adopt something called a pattern book. And again, it's to reintroduce those traditional styles to help people know. And then in the neighborhoods, when we talk about style, so I'm in that class. This is traditional architectural class. It is an all-out fist fight, knuckle brawl when we talk about architectural style, when we talk to folks. I mean, some of my best friends will get in heated debate over all of this. When we look about the architectural styles, it goes back to the massing and the types of that next increment. When we study Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture, that's a good example of an architect learning from the traditional patterns and being innovative in that design. So where are the areas that we can start to allow not the fake stuff, but that next iteration occur? Where can we do that at scale that fits in? So that it's just thinking of that next increment and working through those pieces. But a city like Frederick, I wouldn't be promoting the stuff off of 70 or 15. I'd be promoting everything in your core downtown, because you keep showing all of the pictures of all the beautiful things and it links to your beautiful history of your community, it would be very hard for somebody to do something else. So we're helping to guide and educate folks.
Here's the next increment. I know some people are going to have to leave. So why don't you go quickly over the 5 elements that Strong Towns normally focuses on?
Yeah, so our advocacy work is to change the way we develop cities, to change our development pattern. Pretty lofty piece. There's 5 core campaigns. If you go to our website, strongtowns.org, we have a newsletter you can sign up for and get lots of information. And our core campaigns, he's put me on the spot. Let me make sure I don't lose track of my mind on all of it. But the first is abolishing parking mandates. So in our cities, abolishing those parking mandates, many of them are arbitrary. They came out of nowhere. You can go look at some of our campaigns on that. Parking Reform Network has great resources on it. Ending highway expansion. We have just released an article called Mission Accomplished. We have made it across the country with all of the grand highways Eisenhower wanted to see in this country, where you can get from one coast to the other in 40 hours. We have not stopped that movement forward. We continue to expand out our highway systems, and the problem is that our federal highway fund has been broke since the 90s. So every time that the federal government or the state comes in and says, city, you're blessed with a new interchange, you're blessed with a highway widening project, we're paying for that. And it's actually, we're not paying for it, our grandkids and great-grandkids are. So incremental housing. So when we talk about housing, thinking through all of those components about what it takes for somebody to go and actually do that next increment of housing. And you can call it missing middle, missing small, missing tall. It's all of those house types that we need to see within our community. We have a core campaign called Transparent Local Accounting. This is the one that always gets me in trouble, because as soon as we talk in local government about money or accounting and we say something that questions transparency, all the spikes go up on everybody's back. What we're saying with this work is that the way we do municipal finance, it's very hard for us to truly understand the fiscal health of our cities. We go through the budget process, it's very complicated, and the way we do municipal finance is not the way you or I would do our own personal budgets. So we want to help educate elected leaders and community leaders to really understand all of those fiscal disciplines within those areas. So that is, and we've developed a toolkit, a decoder, where you can put in and look at your financial health over the last 10 or 15 years using numbers you already have. It's 16 numbers of your audited budget reports to put in there. And I'm missing one, and I'm blanking. What am I missing? Oh, of course, the big one. Safe and productive streets. This is a really big one, and I know it's a big one here in your community. Safe and productive streets. So when we talk about streets, I'll try to slip in tonight something we talk about at Strong Towns. When we look at our built environment, our transportation systems, our engineers have all different types of names to call everything. Fundamentally, there are 2 types of transportation systems that we have. We have streets and we have roads. Outside the annex here is a street. This is the area in the middle of our community that it's an economic platform. It's a place we expect to go slow, where we expect to have cyclists and pedestrians, buildings built close to the street. The other transportation system we have are roads. Roads come out of the terminology railroad. These connect destination to destination. We only expect cars or trucks. We expect to go really fast on that. We expect the buildings to be pushed back. Because, much like I talked about the utility department with the pipe and the front porch, because we've been ambiguous on what we're doing on land use, and we're making all the bets before we build, we're making the investment of the road before we understand what's going to be built next to it. We've created a hybrid, which is a street road hybrid, which we call a strode. This is the futon of transportation. Well, we're asking that street road hybrid to do two things simultaneously, and it's doing both those poorly. So when we look at that, out of the safer and productive streets, we want to make sure that we have the right balance of that accommodation. Is it a street or a road? As we look at all of our streets, we have an epidemic across the country where over 40,000 people are being killed every year on all of our streets. And it's not just the highways, it's our local neighborhood streets. At Strong Towns, we saw there was a need for cities to have a different conversation where we don't just assign blame. Whenever there's a terrible crash, we immediately say, oh my gosh, they were speeding, that was a problem. Or the pedestrian wasn't looking, or the driver wasn't paying attention, or the cyclist didn't have the right colors on. And we blame that and we walk away. But what we have found is if we actually look at crashes in a serious way, we find that there are many contributing factors of the built environment that are conveying mixed messages to all the users. Also, on our roadways and streets, when we make an error, the result of that error should not be a fatality. So through Safe and Productive Streets have developed what we call a crash analysis studio, which is an opportunity to look at every serious and fatal crash that occurs in a community. By looking at that in a multidisciplinary way to have a common understanding of what were the conditions of that crash, what happened. Sitting down and identifying what were the contributing factors to that crash. There's no one single contributing factor to any crash. We've hosted over 27 of these. There have been dozens of others hosted by other municipalities and local leaders. We have found in all of those anywhere from a half dozen to dozen contributing factors to a crash. And then asking the simple question, a much different question. What could we do to address those contributing factors? And as we do that, what we're finding as we've gone through each of these studios, there are many, many things that we can do at a local level that are within our control that we can do quickly and cheaply to address those contributing factors. And it's really simple stuff. At Strong Towns, we have been really blessed with an anonymous donor that's helped us to develop this program. And this year they provided us funding for Strong Towns to go out and work with cities to adopt this approach, where we can teach you at no cost how to do it. So I know I've had several people already tell me they're very interested in it here in Frederick. I would love to work with the city to adopt that approach. I'm currently working with 5 or 6 cities across North America. I would love Frederick to be the very first city in Maryland to come out and boldly say, we are exploring Crash Analysis Studio and we're going to adopt it as a process. I will tell you in the process, it doesn't require any additional staff, doesn't require any additional consultants. It's utilizing the resources you already have in your community. We've done this at every size city. So we can work through these things. And the last couple of cities I worked with, it was a couple of meetings to kind of understand the systems and providing the resources to get up and running. So for me, it's a tragedy of all these crashes, but I'm super excited with the opportunity to help people learn that so that our streets are safe and therefore productive in all of our communities.
It's very personal with me because my sister got killed on one of those streets. But the course itself is fun. It's easy to take, and if we could get you here, that would save some lives, or at least some major injuries. We just had one, last week?
Yeah, so you can go on our site and see, we're updating the crash analysis site we wanted to kind of beta test with a couple of cities, so you're ahead of the curve on that. We're getting ready to kind of update that to provide those resources, make it easier for people to do. But we've done these in places, and we have incredible stories that have come out because we've asked different questions and shifted the conversation. And we had an elected official in Hartford, Connecticut, on a street. They battled over years about what are they going to do. The fire department didn't want speed bumps. After multiple fatalities, the crash studio provided the elected leaders a clear path forward of what to ask for. And what was super cool is that here's one of their aldermen. She went out and did a TikTok in the intersection, and in it, she had a very clear direction to the city about what she wanted in it, and it was word for word out of the crash analysis studio report. And staff was like, finally we know exactly what we need to do, so we have the political support to take action on it. In Hyattsville, Maryland, they've updated their street design manual. You know, as you go more easterly in the state, it becomes more cumbersome to make decisions. They didn't know how to make decisions on updating the street standards. Of course, we want every detail possibly could be, but one of the details was counter to all of their other safe streets visions and policies. And the Crash Studio provided the ability for really great discussion to have that removed. In Indianapolis, they're actually started a program, like technical urbanism program, but they call it citizen empowered infrastructure, that allows through this process for citizens to apply for the city to have a matching grant to go out and use cones and paint and temporary materials to make their streets safer in their community. And it's like a $500 or $1,000 grant, but they're going all throughout the city using cones and bollards and paint in those areas to do all different types of cool projects. And guess what? The city isn't getting complaints about this because you've got an entire neighborhood group that spends a Saturday using their human empowered infrastructure, explaining to their neighbors what they're doing and why. And this is, in Indianapolis, they've had a huge spike in fatalities, and this is a way for them to address it quickly and cheaply. And I would describe it as the highest level of public engagement any municipality could do.
What about Jersey City?
Yeah. So all of these are incredible stories of that. I said at the beginning that my big takeaway here is for you to understand that you have the ability at a local level to address these issues. So when we talk about issues that come up, when we think about housing, if the president of the United States can't lower the federal interest rate, there's no way at a local level we're going to do that. But there are literally hundreds of things at a local level that we can control, that we can adjust. At Strong Towns, we have a four-step process that we try to share and teach. Is the four-step process for public investment. And the process is really simple, so just follow along with me, but it has been one of the most powerful tools I've seen any community use to seek change. The first step is to go out and humbly observe in your community where somebody is struggling. What is that struggle? Identify that in a single sentence. And it's not just like affordability of housing or dangerous streets. What is the single action with that? Is it that there's not enough housing? Is it people can't cross the street? Is there a maintenance issue? Working through those pieces and clearly defining that in a single step. The second step is to ask yourself, what do you have the power to do to go out to address that struggle? And when I talk to coaching with municipalities, I say, we're not going to look at this in months. What could we do by next Friday with your department, with the resources in the public works yard, with the power and authority that's been given to us by council? When I work with public groups, I would have all of you kind of circle on both sides of the room and talk through. I'm sure within each of your groups, you all have something you could do to address that local struggle that you have the ability to go out in the next week and do. At Strong Towns, we're huge cheerleaders of this work, so the third step is to actually go do it. If you have the ability to make something easier, to address a struggle, go do it. And the fourth thing is repeat. Learn from it, repeat. Let's say you go out and you were trying to do a safer crosswalk and you went out and said, okay, the thing I could do is put a cone on the street where the crosswalk is to see if drivers would stop. And what happens is all the drivers run over the cone. That's a failure, but we can learn from that. Right? We can learn that that wasn't effective, but it's something I actually was able to do. What if I put 2 cones out there? What if there are other things that we could do to that? That is that kind of system of working through. But what if we put that cone out there and every car goes slower that day? That's a huge win with very little risk. We did a 2-year engagement process in Medicine Hat up in Alberta, Canada. And I will tell you, the folks in Canada, they are more probably systems oriented than here. So very rigid, have to work within the systems. They had a problem in the downtown where in Canada, they don't have to provide all the public restrooms that we have to in the States. So in their core downtown, they had a lack of public restrooms. They had a housing issue. So you had folks that were defecating in the downtown, and there was no action to do on that. And the city council was getting ready to spend about $600,000 on a public restroom. It was $600,000 they didn't have. It was a site that wasn't even by the downtown, and then they didn't know how they were going to maintain it once it was opened. One of their directors in their busing department was part of our coaching team, and he said, well, you know, what I could do is I could actually make a map of the downtown. It's four streets. I could put dots where all the restrooms are. I could put the hours that those public restrooms are open. So we have City Hall, we have the bus depot, there was a park building, some of those things. And we'll put a QR code so others could find it if they wanted to do that. He printed that off. Now he told his wife the day before he did this, he goes, honey, I'm close to retirement. You know, usually when we do this at City Hall, we have to have a committee of 12 to figure out what color font we're going to use. So I don't know how they're going to think about this, but this is really important. This is an issue that I think I can help and contribute to. So he printed off a dozen of these, put them in Ziploc gallon bags, zipped it up, and then gave it to his maintenance people at the bus department to put on all the bus posts through the downtown. What happened was a conversation in the city about public restrooms. He put it up. The next couple days later, he then walked to businesses and said, hey, we did this poster. I don't know if you saw it. I want to hand it to you so you as a business owner now know where you can direct somebody that needs to use the restroom. He said every business he walked into, he got a hug, and people were in tears because they didn't know how to address their local problem. Now, he thought for sure he was going to be fired. The city council elevated him in a council meeting and said, this is incredible work. You have done something. And they then shifted. He said, yeah, you know, the next smallest step for us is that the bus depot, that bathroom, we want everybody to park at the bus depot. That's the garage closest to the main street. We have public restrooms there that we close at 5 o'clock, but there are restaurants that are open till 7. Could we get an extra officer there that would walk it for security, monitor it, and leave the bathrooms open for a couple of more hours? That was a $20,000 investment from the city versus a $600,000 investment, and checked a whole bunch of other boxes. That simple process led to the city manager starting a program called the Nimble Awards. She said any staff member that comes up with a program like this, bring it to her once it's there, and she'd give you you'd be in the running for a day off. So big deal for them. She had 36 applications the next month. She had to kill the program. She didn't have enough days to give off. But it resulted, they started doing this as staff. They would meet a staff meeting of directors asking these questions. The next thing that happened that was noticeable in the city is they restructured their entire city staff. They realized that they needed to do that. What could they do to function the needs of their community? That resulted in restructuring the budget. There's actually budget statements that are said that they can't afford to do certain things. Staff was now empowered to share those pieces because the struggle was we don't have enough money. We can't have the 6th pool in our town for a population of 40,000 people. We're going to be stuck with the 5th pool. And then when a housing program came up, they developed a housing program that was a citywide approach to address all the housing needs in their community. It was a 9-step program. They were hoping to get federal money to support it. But the beauty of the 9-step program is there were 9 things the city could do tomorrow to address the housing crisis in their city. This exercise that went forward in Medicine Hat was something that occurred over about 9 months. This was earth-shattering in their community, and they continued to do all these other pieces from it. And it started with somebody saying, what was the next smallest thing I could do? I could print something out, tell my wife I might get fired, and put a sign up on the main street. And what we hope at Strong Towns is that all of us are thinking about those small things because they have a huge impact that can lead to change and start different conversations and help us to address all the struggles we find in our community. So I'm going to be here. I have cards, I have stickers. Please take all of that stuff. If you have questions and you want to chat with me, please email me. We can set up time. I'd love to figure out how we can do Crash Analysis Studio here. And I'll be speaking at CivicCon tonight with cool slides. I'll show some other examples of working through that. I hope everybody, if you have a chance to come out tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.